cybersecurity, rather than having generic products that say sit across the OT space and across the IT space, and even then they tend to be different.
Yep.
We've said, what about we look at the entire electricity supply chain? And the electricity supply chain is highly interconnected. So we have data centers.
NetSeg or bust, keep your network zero trust. NetSeg.io, where the data needs to go. NetSeg or bust, keep your network zero trust. NetSeg.io.
So great to be here today with Phil Blythe, the founder of CAPA Intelligence, and welcome to the podcast. Phil, do you want to maybe kick off with just sharing a little bit about maybe your career background and what's driven you to where you are today, founding CAPA Intelligence?
Thanks, Leon. It's been a journey for me. I've started in the research space. I started in the aviation sector actually.
Yeah, right.
And military defence contracts side of space, and then I got into IT basically probably 30 years ago.
Yep.
Been working in IT and cyber related things for all that time. I've really been building companies. So in London, I was building financial products and insurance. Back in Australia, it was building automation.
Yep.
So I always had a sort of an OT focus to these things. And then for the last 20 years, it's been in energy.
Yep.
I got into energy, was motivated by climate change and the things going on there. And so we built a company, NetSeg. I ran it for 11 years. A lot about distributed energy. So we built products and sold them in Australia, UK, US. And that was really my kind of first learning experience, I suppose, in building large scale, really OT technology for running demand response and basically critical assets that run across the electricity grid. We ran about 500 megawatts here in Australia, so it was pretty significant for the time.
Yeah.
I guess all of that sort of taught me a lot about how critical infrastructure is growing in the electricity sector. It's growing in importance. The geopolitical situation is deteriorating.
Yep.
And we set up CAPA about 3 years ago to really focus on that problem and really just focus on the renewable sector and and how important that is as a global asset.
Yeah, and would you say Australia's kind of leading the way as far as DER adoption goes, or are there other countries doing it well or more advanced than us? Because we seem pretty ahead of the curve.
Yeah, look, Australia's unusually ahead of the curve in this, and I think it was by accident. But I think the government, many years ago, brought in policies of encouraging rooftop solar.
Yeah.
And back in 2010, when we started NetSeg, there was 1 or 2%. It was like a tiny percentage of the energy. It's now 40%. And rising. And now with battery storage and effectively, distributed, decentralized assets on people's rooftops and in their garages, we're seeing a large percentage of supply coming from domestic use. Now, that is quite unique around the world, and that really does shape the landscape of how we think about utility scale in Australia. There are other countries, moving towards that in that direction, but we're quite unique in that blend of domestic systems as part of our infrastructure.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot of considerations with running a grid where you don't have a dozen coal-fired power stations with a giant turbine running. It's thousands and hundreds of thousands of solar panels and other distributed resources that you don't just plug them in and away you go. You have to balance the supply and demand on the grid at all times. Otherwise, you get cascading failures like we saw in Spain.
Exactly
in the Iberian
right.
Peninsula. Yeah.
Exactly right. And that's the central market operator or central system operator, or AMO, in Australia, and that's their job to keep things stable. And I think when distributed energy was a couple of percent, it didn't matter. It was in the margins. They had SCADA systems controlling all of the main utility systems, and that was enough to make sure that they had their finger on the button and they could control the system.
Yeah.
Now that you got at times 40, 50, 60% of the energy coming from all of these sources that really aren't controlled by SCADA, they're on people's rooftops. That's a problem. If you're an operations centre, you don't have the level of control that you need. So what we've been doing over the last 5 years in Australia is bringing in what I would call more of a critical infrastructure flavour to the way that we need to manage these assets. So we're bringing in emergency backstop capability, which is if things really go bad, we've got a button to press. We can reduce the exports on those systems. We can intervene when we need to, trying to let people use energy and have the most flexibilities they can, but when things go bad, as we know from the OT world, there's sometimes ways we need to manage these things, and that flavour is starting to infiltrate how we build and manage these systems now.
Yeah, well, so much of civilization now relies on reliable electricity that 1 in 10 year event is worth investing a lot of money to prevent, just because of not just the cascading failures on a grid scenario, but all the other critical services that rely on electricity to run.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting in the last 3 to 5 years, well, just even the last 3 years, how we've seen internationally the geopolitics of energy.
Yes.
And so we've seen Venezuela, these military activities always start with an electricity system. It's happening in Iran, it's happening everywhere. So I think this is where energy is a civilian asset, but it's certainly there's a national security thread that runs through it, which is nation states will be looking at the energy system to infiltrate and to position well ahead. This is back into sort of how the whole cyber space is evolving now. They're pre-positioning in case they need to pull that lever at some point in time. So that starts to blend us into a different space, and that's quite new, I think, for the energy sector. But that's the global reality now.
Global reality. It's a good way of explaining it, because we've seen it with Volt Typhoon pre-positioning in the US, and then the Polish grid attack, which was primarily targeting DER systems, from what I read. You can now, fortunately, it wasn't a disaster type scenario. They didn't have a black system or anything like that, but you can easily see how a motivated attacker who really did want to, it's basically going nuclear when you do that. On another country's civilian population, that's certainly possible.
Yeah, and that particular one's interesting. If you read the analysis, the wrap up of that attack, they could have gone a lot further, and they stopped. Right. The only thing that didn't averted disaster was they decided to not go further. Yeah. So I think that is it's a big warning, I think, for all of us that these adversaries are positioning and practicing, I would say. And I think certainly the Ukraine theatre is really interesting on how much people have learnt over there and through the whole European conflict. I mean, going back into sort of when the Ukraine war first broke out, I think there was 12,000 turbines that were affected. Yeah. And that's a lot within like a space of a month.
Yes.
Now that didn't happen because people, the Russians broke into those systems. They're already there, right? So the pre-positioning thing is all starts to play out. As soon as these conflicts, these geopolitical hotspots flare up, then suddenly that pre-positioning becomes so important. So, and look, it's the hardest thing in the cyber sector to defend against, because if they're good nation-state actors, you don't know about them, or it's hard to find, right? And,
they're very well resourced. They've got a long time horizon and very sophisticated attacks, and and they're supported often by their home governments.
Exactly, and so we can't fool ourselves to say we know everything about what these activities are, but we have to kind of assume that that's going on, right? Yep. And the diligence we put into protecting the infrastructure has to assume that pre-positioning is happening, and that people may be inside, and how do we defend from the inside?
Yep. Great point, and I think it's not scaremongering to be real about this is very likely and something that people need to assume is happening. Now when they consider their defences. So coming then to CAPA intelligence and what you're doing now, the area of industrial cybersecurity is seen as one subset of cybersecurity, but it was really interesting learning about this new venture that's a couple of years in now, 3 years, something like that, and where you focused and what you're considering versus just I'm going to secure a SCADA PCN network and it doesn't matter what kind of industry it is. It's a totally different approach, what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that we've taken a bet with CAPA to focus purely on one sector. And that's partly that we have, my co-founder and I both have deep experience in the energy sector and quite a lot range of different roles.
Yep.
So that's one thing, but we've taken a punt that cybersecurity, rather than having generic products that say sit across the OT space and across the IT space, and even then they tend to be different.
Yep.
We've said, what about we look at the entire electricity supply chain? And the electricity supply chain is highly interconnected. So we have data centers that are operating parts of the software stack in the IT space, in IoT space. We have operations centers sitting in different parts of the world running wind farms. We have and battery storage systems all around Australian infrastructure. Now that's not the standard OT model.
No.
And a lot of these assets sit in IT as well. So you have to be proficient in the space. You have to be good at IT and you have to be good at OT, because all of those are critical assets. The attackers don't necessarily discriminate really. You don't have an OT hacker and
a lot of OT
IT
incidents start with an IT incident that then just bleeds
Exactly.
across the border. And I think the AI models, the threat landscape there now of them just finding a way and going, oh, that looks interesting. If I've been told to attack this system, well, guess what? There's no credentials on this particular HMI because of just the nature of
exactly
20 years ago.
Yeah, and look, that's another topic worth its own discussion. But the general philosophy is to understand the supply chain is becoming more and more important, and you're seeing this reflected now in the Australian Reg under the SOCI Act's being changed to really drill into the supply chain and understand what the risks are, both from foreign interference, but just understanding what's inside, what's in the box. If has anyone looked, has anyone really explored what type of components are inside something you've just procured? And so we're looking at that from a holistic perspective. That's the supply chain from all of the equipment, all the digital software that's running across the IT and the OT stacks, the data centers. So if we have a data center outage, what are the ripple effects across the energy sector if we lose one of our...
If that data center's controlling a battery system that does grid firming.
Exactly.
It's not powered.
How do we know how much concentration risk we have around one AWS or an Azure cloud system? We don't really know is the answer. So trying to better drill in and model all of these capabilities. Telco is another aspect. We've seen these big outages come from Telstra and that. What are the ripple effects on the system? All of our systems depend on telco, right?
Yes.
All of them. What are the ripple effects of that onto our energy infrastructure? So really we've said that's actually a really critical system to model, and that's where we've put our energy. So CAPA as a company, we work right across the sector: transmission, distribution, generation, so wind and solar and BESS. Then also, we work across the GRC, so starting with risk and regulation, all the way down to defence and offence as well. And working how really our offensive capabilities so we can be better at defence. Very much so we can strengthen the capability at the security operations level. So we've taken a punt to do pretty much everything across the sector. So.
Well, it's needed, and I don't think there's anyone that I've spoken to who's really got at a very high level the whole electricity supply chain in their head of the different mechanisms and dependencies that you have. And it doesn't have to be a cyber attack that could cause a cascading failure. Just not understanding where that critical piece of the puzzle, and only discovering when you take it away that everything collapses, then you suddenly learn, oh, that was more important than we thought.
Yeah, it's totally right. And then I was just at a conference actually just this week, and someone was asking about, how do I think about this cyber problem? And I said, look, maybe it's easier, just think about it as risk and resilience. And they went, sort of the penny dropped, and went, that makes it so much easier. I mean, cyber is a difficult word for a lot of business people. They just think it's sort of this black box and they can never understand it. But they understand risk and they understand the whole concept of resilience. And what you're saying here is, like most attacks, when we actually detect with our detection systems going, 90%, 95% of them are not suspicious activity from malicious suspicious activity. It's like someone doing something stupid. Someone's starting to use a certificate from a weird location. Some developer did something really stupid. Shouldn't have done it, but we picked it up and they did something dumb. And the detections are working, but guess what? Non-malicious, stupid activity. what called the Iberian outage, you know, are cascading failures of people not having the right settings, most likely.
Yep.
It's what happened in South Australia when the grid went out there as well.
Yep.
So we should be thinking about more broadly, well, we think about it this way because when we look at the energy sector, cyber and risk and resilience all is the one thing, right?
Yep.
We should be thinking about how do we make the system resilient. So everything's got a digital component to it these days, so it puts it into the cyber basket. But yeah, that is absolutely the broader context around this.
Yeah, and I found this really helpful when I'm having conversations with people who work primarily in OT that maybe haven't had really a cyber component to their role before. And I'm not trying to teach them about how you might get hacked. It's more like, well, you know about business continuity. You know that you have to keep producing and do it safely. Cyber is just another root cause to impact business productivity in OT. And it's a root cause that's now likely to become more frequent because of the nature of these systems becoming more interconnected.
Exactly, yeah. And there's all these interesting interactions. So, for example, physical access, right? You know, physical access, someone breaks into the bottom of a wind turbine and I heard the other day they could literally climb up the interiors of a wind turbine and
paint a picture of a bird on the pillar or something.
Exactly, they could do stupid things like that. But then eventually, you know, how does that, how do they gain initial access to the system? And that's a digital component that goes back to the network operating center. So, you know, physical access, access control all eventually gets back into the cyberspace. So I think the way that looking at risk now, I think is got to be much broader. We used to sort of have these hazards all sort of isolated, but as a lot of these things are crossing boundaries, right? They cross from OT to IT, they cross from physical to cyber. We need to start thinking, and even natural hazards. You know, natural hazards are certainly we can't predict when a cyclone's going to hit, but we can start understanding what the fallout and what the mitigations and the containment aspects of that would be, and they look very similar to the way you deal with containment and having a system compromised in your cyber infrastructure. Yeah,
and then to make it even more complicated, you've not got one organisation running everything. You've got lots of different organisations. Some of them are traditional power companies, some of them are government entities like the market operator, and some of them are, superannuation funds or sovereign wealth funds that want to buy a bunch of wind farms. And so how do you then reconcile that when you're looking at the whole electricity supply chain and go, well, how do we protect the system of systems and think beyond just an individual system that a cyber leader at, a small DER operator might be thinking about it?
That's a really good point. I think, the challenge is the way that we have decentralized cybersecurity. We said, right, if every organization is separately secure, then the system's secure. Now, that works, I suppose, to a large extent in the corporate world, but let's take banking. Okay, so all the banks are secure and people aren't able to, exfil data or break into financial systems and, make fake transactions. But there's interbank transfers, and so those things can be corrupted. So how do you protect those interbank transfers? And so increasingly, if you look probably any sector, you have these sector-wide supply chain issues. All of the vendors who are supplying banks are another way into banks, right? So banks have these tentacles as well, and the software, get into the whole software supply chain, and the vulnerabilities that are coming through that are enormous. So actually, I think the same logic applies to many sectors. Is just that what we've done is fragmented up into a whole bunch of buckets. So there's people who do supply chains, and there's endless questionnaires that will go out between all the vendors in the supply chain. So I think the complexity is there, and I think as we, I would like to think that we do energy, and that becomes a bit of a model that other people do in other sectors. I think it's a very deep well. And it's hard to be expert at everything. And so I would suggest that those complexities exist in other sectors as well as energy. But you're right, organisations aren't very good at working with each other. And I think the challenge is when you understand what impact looks like, it's not just your organisation, it's how that impacts other organisations. So an outage here could definitely do damage to you, but it can do damage to all the surrounding infrastructure that's connected to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think energy is so much more advanced and so much more interdependent, and a small failure in a certain part of that system could cause a cascading, runaway train type effect. I guess that's why it's become so prevalent and, caused organisations like your own to be created.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bit fractal, so there are organisations like AMA who have this bird's eye view across the system, and their job is to sort of provide that extra level of assurance that sits across the top. So I suppose the organisational structures reflect a bit of that. But it's interesting. I mentioned AI before, and the speed at which that's coming into the space. I think, it's interesting to now understand how quickly those effects can span out across a sector.
Yes.
Like a supply chain attack that's not just hitting you, but it's hitting 20 organisations in the space. Yep. And what are the effects of that? It's getting hard. It's a harder problem to manage, and you wonder whether there some central capability is going to be needed to manage some of those attacks.
Yeah, and look, I think full credit, AMA have always been very strong in cyber leadership in the energy sector. Some of the content they put out around things like that, and the way that we're hardening our own regulations at a government level, SOCI and CI Fortify and things like that. I mean, it's probably hard to run an electricity system isolated for 3 months if you have to, but it's I guess it then becomes, if there is one governing thing that can connect everything, if that were to be compromised, then someone's just got a skeleton key to everything and can go, right, I'm just going to take a gigawatt off this part of the system, and then bang, the frequency just goes haywire, and we just get a cascading failure on the NEM. I mean, that's a disaster scenario, but we have to consider that is a possibility if someone did that.
Yeah, and that's AMO's challenge, right? With having direct control of those generators, it's the sort of the crown jewels of the system, and they've got, as you say, an extremely important role in sort of managing the security across the system in that regard. But as we know, all systems are vulnerable in some way, and we have to be building more and more defences as time goes on. So
one of the comparisons that I've sort of come to mind to me over time, and is comparing a modern DER power grid to the internet, and how the internet is not really governed by. There's not one organisation that controls the internet. There's a few that manage domains and IP addressing and things like that. But the internet is a whole lot of different systems that becomes resilient because it's a whole lot of different systems that you could cause damage if you targeted the right thing here and there, but you can't just knock it out. And I look at the way the power industry is evolving, where probably what we've seen in the last 10 years, the next 10 years, is probably the same kind of change we've seen since from no electricity to 1995. And what do you think about that idea of, when you take DER to its logical conclusion, where, it's more like the internet? Do you think that's is that likely to happen? Like, what is the implications?
No, look, it's an interesting one, I hear that there is this debate, I think, still pressing on in the sector, particularly as we sort of hit 50% of the overall supply, right? And it's becoming a very large problem, and concentration risk of a single vendor, right, becomes pretty significant. A single OEM outage, if it's wiped out or compromised, that's a big deal now. And I guess this is it. So if everything is fully decentralized and no one operates anything, and there isn't any sort of dependency trees and a sort of single point of failure, or the ability for a cascading failure to really occur because it's fully decentralized. Now, I get that, and that is quite a resilient system. The reality is different, though. The reality is there is a single OEM that no one knows about, that's actually running across 30% of the infrastructure. And if you lose that, then you're cactus. So it's understanding what that concentration risk is important. I think you can run with that argument of decentralization if you can be sure that there's no concentration risk you haven't thought about and didn't know about, right?
And you're probably never going to catch absolutely everything, because something's going to come out of left field. You're like, oh, we didn't know about this. And then all of a sudden you can have that
Yeah, and some, I know that this is from the crypto sector, right? For example, everyone said DeFi and the whole decentralized finance system, and we looked at just that blockchain thing sort of had its moment in the energy sector. Everyone thought, oh yeah, this is a great way to run energy, and then we went, well, what if some nation state decided to buy all the crypto for that, and then they could take over the energy infrastructure simply by
51% attack.
Exactly, and you go, oh no, that's a bad idea.
Well, ironically enough, we could see a situation in 20 years where the future of energy, or the future of currency is actually energy, and just gigawatts, and that's how you pay for things.
Well, look at AI data centers, right?
Yep.
They're measured in megawatts and gigawatts now, right? So they're converging on, don't worry about the compute, just measure any energy output.
Yep.
And that's becoming a huge, AI in a couple of dimensions. One, the loads that are going onto the system and the data centers, that's becoming a major...
It's a whole separate challenge.
Exactly. How do we build data centers in a reliable way, and the amount of power that they're going to need to power that infrastructure. What if it's there? What if it's not there?
It's becoming cheaper to send them into space, which is like, if you told someone that 20 years ago, they'd say you're mad.
I'm not sure that's quite true yet, but I think that's one of the propositions.
But it's a possible scenario, and I think that just shows the amount of constraints that we're running into.
Yeah.
And it's going to come to the point where, your everyday citizen is like, well, why do I have to argue with an AI provider, this giant company, around availability of energy, because they'll pay top dollar.
Yeah.
Whereas I just want to heat my home and have the lights on.
Yeah, and look, AI is an interesting thing obviously in cybersecurity in general, and I think it becomes more important as you think of the sovereignty of these things, right? We've got America starting to lock down models. I mean, even the sovereignty issue in the energy space, just literally this week, they banned robotics from classified or listed countries like China, as well as inverters. Just banned them straight out. Europeans done something different. So there's an industrial dimension to that, and people protecting their industrial bases. But cybersecurity is often used as a reason for behind these things. So sovereignty, if you are using AI for defensive capabilities or to protect your system, you need to start thinking about building your own infrastructure. We can't necessarily rely on the way that the AI models are being developed and constrained by the governments that operate them. So that's becoming more important too.
I definitely feel in Australia, and probably this is similar in other countries, more of a recognition of a sovereign capability being worth paying a premium for.
Exactly, and it goes into many things like, yes, you can operate something from an overseas data center, but you have to ask the question from a risk perspective, does that pose more risks than if it was running in Australia? And the answer is yes. Right? And it's not to say it's not insurmountable, but it is definitely higher risk, right? And so if you look at the treatments of that, it's probably should have more assurance wrapped around it, more compliance, so the cost is probably going to be higher as a result. So there is a tipping point where you go, well, maybe sovereign is just a better approach.
And a recognition that premium's worth something, and it might be worth something if you're in procurement and you're just thinking about value today. But if you're thinking about, I'm operating a system of national significance in Australia, we recognise this sovereign risk. It's hard to quantify, but we want to keep our supply chain closer to home.
Exactly, and there should be some differentiation in those things, and the other thing that governments have now requiring under SOCI is this foreign ownership, control and interference mandate to vet our supply chain, and if we think there's risk of foreign interference, we should mitigate against it. Now that doesn't necessarily mean we don't procure things from those countries. But it does mean we need to put another layer of assurance across the top.
Make a risk-informed.
Exactly, right? And we might have to add some additional things on top of it to make sure that is, that can be relied on. So,
Very interesting how it's all evolving and really fast.
So
turning back to CAPA then, what's your main offering and who are the customers you kind of look to work with?
So we work with utilities, so that'd be transmission, distribution, retail.
Anyone involved in the
energy
electrons
space,
going to people.
Pretty much, yeah. So then the generators, so that's the wind farms, so the vendors of of those and the providers into the system.
Yep.
Battery storage, again, though people write. Batteries are now usually done as hybrids, so hybrids with solar or batteries with wind. We're seeing that coming through as well.
And why do people build them like that?
It's just becoming batteries. Obviously, intermittent renewables. This thing called Dunkelflatter, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. There's a German word for it.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. What do we do when we have Dunkelflatter? So the idea of batteries is they're able to spread that energy over a longer period of time.
Yep.
So if you have 8-hour storage, the wind can blow and then not blow, and the sun can shine and not shine, and then the batteries can smear that out over the period of the day. So we get a more continuous energy supply by having batteries in the system.
I think distributed BESS systems, I see, is actually a really good solution to a lot of the cascading failures you will see, because they kind of create this damper effect across the grid.
Yeah.
And you can kind of use that to shuffle around, and like the battery that was built after the South Australian black system.
Yeah, Hornsdale, yeah.
That probably would have prevented such a situation, but also from the frequency control market of just keeping the grid at 50 hertz, it paid for itself pretty quickly from what I'd read.
Yeah, it did. And then the frequency, now we've got huge numbers of batteries and the frequency market's dead. So it's, it's short-lived, but it's definitely done the job, right?
Yeah.
And now we're getting sort of DC connected assets. So things that not even digitally controlled but just through analog, just by voltage running, energy running through to, from high to low voltage. DC connected assets on people's rooftops. So you have one inverter for your battery and your solar, and similar at a wind farm, you have one inverter, and that's connected to your wind generator and your batteries. It's cheaper, simpler. But we're just putting batteries everywhere. It's like, they're on rooftops, they're in substations, they're under wind turbines. Just put them everywhere. It's kind of the mentality now, because they're just getting really cheap. So you're seeing these hybrid things, systems appearing everywhere.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so when someone goes to CAPA and goes, I need help, how do you help them? What do they buy from you to?
Yeah, so usually we start with at the top level from a governance and compliance perspective, and we look at the regulatory strategy. Say, well, where do you sit in the market at the moment? Are you non-compliant? The regs are all changing really rapidly. Are you trying to achieve compliance? You're on a pathway. Where are the gaps? And
all your customers are going to be under those enhanced obligations that Home Affairs have proposed. Yeah,
that's right. So they just changed, and there's like a ×2 or ×3 amount of regulatory requirements that have been introduced. And so there's big changes required from pretty much everyone.
Yeah, but they all aligning to ASCSF as a standard.
Yeah, that's right. Which is the
AEMO standard.
The AEMO's the electricity sectors framework, and AEMO's governing that. But out of all of that, pretty much everyone's on a journey. No one can meet those requirements.
Well, it is a journey, and I think that's what people need to recognise. It's not, I'm going to do an OT cyber project and away we go. It's a long-term maturity journey, and I think the regulations, it's not just about you must do this. It's like, show me how you're maturing things as you adopt more tech, and you're not going backwards and exposing.
Exactly. So what we do is we work with clients and say, well, there's a roadmap here. Let's figure out what are the most important things, and we try to go from a security standpoint, because look, we have a risk-based regulation framework. Let's start with the highest risks. So how do we categorise those? We build threat models. We build a threat model of that part of the wind farm or a distribution system or part of the infrastructure. We build a threat model, and we literally work out all the different threat scenarios and mitigations that we can put in place. We rate them, and we create a roadmap, right? So now, by doing that, we've modelled their infrastructure. We've developed effectively a cyber kind of model of how the system works, and a risk model. And from that's sort of like, for us, the linchpin. Then we understand how to govern the system. That provides a framework for governance and reporting. But then we get into security operations to say, well, these mitigations, here is where we need to focus on putting, say, into threat detections, and we move into more of the security operations side of things. Vulnerability management, threat intel, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. usually we provide that whole service either as product or as managed service capabilities through our clients. So we think about it as a long-term relationship. We're trying to take them on a journey to get through the compliance obligations as one part, but security operations these are long-lived assets, right? They've got to be set up so they could be operated cheaply and effectively over the long term.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's the whole, build it secure now, but all the stuff that was built 10 years ago that had no consideration. How do we, manage that effectively and efficiently?
Yeah.
Without going, we just got to build another one, which is just not practical for the 50-year asset life cycle.
Exactly. Yeah. And look, there's so many new assets coming online as well, and so there's quite a different plan for someone who's just building something new, and they often say, how do I do cyber? And we say, okay, here's a plan.
Yeah. Well, that's the big thing, is someone going, what about cyber? And then it's just this whole Pandora's box of all these considerations we've talked about for the last 20, 30 minutes, and being able to go to someone like yourselves who understands the whole electricity supply chain, can say, you're in this part of the supply chain. This is where you're at now. This is what you need to think about. And then, as you said, partnering with them, taking them on that journey of doing good practice technology risk management.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's what it is at the top level. And then when you get down to the smaller parts, it's like, okay, how do I solve this problem? All right, then you either pick a particular monitoring solution, or you work with them on with building your own. In some cases, that's what's required. But I think all of those it's problem solving, right? And what's a cheap, sensible, appropriate way to manage the risk, right? And I think that's what we always have to keep your eye on. There's an infinite number of things you could do. How do we make sure we're doing the right amount of things in the right places at the right time?
There's no point having like AS256 certificates, doing some SCADA comms if you've got an open VPN that's sitting on the internet.
And being able to be versatile to move to those things where the highest risks are for the business.
100%. No, you've really taught me a lot today, Phil, about just the way the grid is changing and the need for organisations like yourselves to have this deep domain expertise. There wouldn't be really many other peer organisations globally that are doing what you're doing.
No, look, Robert Lee from Dragos is an energy guy. Well, he's done a lot of time in the energy space, but ex-NSA, but he's a lot more versatile from that perspective than us. But look, I don't know. Look, we do think that cyber is a pretty complex landscape, and to be good at all domains and all disciplines of cyber is a pretty hard thing, right? So,
you need a lot of deep non-cyber electricity domain knowledge to be able to do what you're doing, that specialisation. And I think we'll probably see more organisations like yours appear with different verticals like manufacturing, oil and gas and mining, because 80% of it's common, but that last 20%, as it becomes more interconnected in global supply chains, there's all kinds of different considerations that you really need to understand the industry really deeply.
Well, you need to understand the threats, right? And to understand there's a big overlap between the threat domain and the contextual domain you're operating in. So
100%. Any closing thoughts, Phil?
Look, not really. I think the sector is undergoing huge change from a critical infrastructure space. So it's timely to be for everyone to be rethinking how they manage their infrastructure. But people say, where do I start? I say, you always start at the top. Like, what do you think about going back to from a risk management perspective? What are my main risks? And you look at the AI threat now. We're working with many people on the defensive side against real AI threats. That's one of them. But I think that's what people have to do.
Got to start somewhere.
And that's always at the top.
Thanks so much, Phil. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Leon.
Very good.
Great chat.
NetSeg